So now we have this logic for our cart ID, right? But we haven't actually created the cart itself. So with this very basic logic, we'll go ahead and create it. We'll go ahead and do from.models, import cart. So of course the relative import. And then wherever it says create new cart, we'll just say cart obj equals to cart.objects.create. And we'll just say user is none for the moment. And then this cart object will just add that ID into the session. So cart object.id. That's it, right? And then down here, we've got this cart ID exists. What I'm going to do here is just print out this cart ID. In general, I would probably end up then doing the cart object equals to cart.objects.get ID equals to that cart ID. Okay, so that's essentially what I would probably end up doing. Now, the first thing that I probably will have to do, though, is delete that original cart ID with delete request.session and cart ID. Okay, so that's how I delete a session variable. So I refresh in there, and it's probably going to say that I need to create it pretty much every time. Actually, we took out those print stuff. So let's go ahead and bring it back, and it'll say print new cart created. We'll put that at the bottom of that. Okay, so we've got our new cart in there, and it's going to do it every single time because I'm literally deleting the key right before I reference it. So since I deleted that, that was to delete or flush out our old information here. So I'm going to just go ahead and save this, and before I refresh even in here, I'm going to go back in the admin and refresh, go into my carts app, and I see that I've got 3 carts here, right? Pretty cool. So 3 carts actually exist. They're actually on here because I created them. Now, if I log out of this CFE user and then refresh back in that cart and then log back in, I'll see that I have my 4 carts here now. And if I refresh again, what do you know? It doesn't actually create a brand new cart. If you weren't paying attention, that probably went very quickly. Basically, what I did was I logged out of my current user, which ended the session and deleted all session variables. And then I added, or actually went to the cart again. So I created a brand new cart. And then I logged back in, and that cart was still created, as in it was still active. So that's actually really cool. So one of the good things about how the session variables work is when you log in, it doesn't clean out the old session. So this is really, really useful for users that are like, they actually authenticated already, but they haven't logged in yet, and they added a bunch of items to the cart. I mean, it's so frustrating to go on a site that you use all the time, and you're going to buy something, and then you realize you didn't log in, and then when you log in, all of your progress is lost. So all of your cart is lost. That's super, super frustrating. So in this case, it goes the other way, and it actually makes a lot more sense if you're already logged in. So there are ways to go about, having guest users check out and do all those things. That's not stuff we're going to cover just yet. And still, we have to actually fix and make this cart even better. I mean, I talked about this is instance thing right here. So the big question here is, what happens if you set the cart ID as a string, right? Or the cart itself has been deleted. Like you as the admin went to the back end and deleted one of these objects. What happens to this method here with that? That's something that we have to account for. And how we're going to go about doing this is really just by testing it out. So I'm going to go ahead and first of all say request session or the cart ID, and I'm going to put it equal to ABC. So I'm setting the session right there to just check out the rest of my logic, right? So I'm setting it to ABC, and cart ID exists, so all of that stuff should work. If I refresh into the cart itself, I get this error, invalid literal for integer with base of 10 ABC. So basically, I'm trying to look up an ID or a number by a string. That doesn't work, right? Python gets mad at you. So what you want to do then is let's go ahead and bring in this is instance part. So that actually says, hey, we want to make sure that this is an integer itself. So we're going to save it, refresh in here. Let's go ahead and run it. Oops, we got to get rid of that colon. There we go. Error's back. Okay, and we refresh, and what do you know? It's still giving me that same error, right? Obviously it is, because this is an like it's basically saying, hey, this is invalid because of this instance. So what if I change this to 12? Well, cart ID is not none, as we see here, right? So it's definitely not none. And is it this integer, right? So is it actually getting this integer here? So I refresh in here, and it says cart matching query does not exist. So that actually works. So the good thing is here is I can actually look this up by a string of an integer, not have to make this into an integer like that, right? So that's really cool there. So what that also means is that if I have it in as an integer, then what I can do is I can create my cart based off of something else. So I'm actually going to make a new method here, and I'll just say cart create, and I'll just say user equals to none. And then I'm going to just bring this back and return that cart object. Okay, so in here, I'm going to just leave this in as cart create. And there we go. So cart object equals to cart create. So this is if the user is none, and the instance of the cart ID is an integer. So basically, I actually don't want this in one block. What I really want is just if the cart ID is none. So if it is none, then we're going to create a brand new cart. Otherwise, we have a cart ID. I want to make sure that it's an instance of the integer, right? So I want to actually check if is instance the cart ID of int. And then I would do a QS here and do all this stuff. Now, I actually don't have to do this check because, again, I can actually do some lookups by my actual item. So I can do query set equals to cart.objects.filter ID equals to cart ID. If not, QS.exists, as in if there is nothing there, and QS.count equals to 1. So I want to make sure that it exists and there's only one of them. Really, there probably only would be one of them, so I'll just say if count equals to 1, then we'll say cart obj equals to qs.first. Otherwise, cart obj, again, we're creating another cart because it doesn't exist. And there we go. So I'm going to print out this statement here. Okay. And cart ID exists here. And that's it. Okay, and then if I do create it, I probably want to have it in the session itself, but I'm going to leave it down with where I actually create it in the actual view that I created in. So the cart exists or it's created. Okay, so I realize that there's probably some gray area, like how did all this work? So we're going to walk through it again. Number one, we want to get the cart session. We want to make sure that we get the cart ID from the session. So the number that's associated to the object in our database. Right? So that's what this does. That actually gets it. We set it here as a test, and then we actually get it here. And then if we don't have one, if it's empty, then we just create one, and then we set it to the session. Okay? But if we do have one, we want to make sure that it actually exists, and that's what this does. So if it does exist, then we just set the same cart object or the same variable to whatever this is, right? The first object in there, because the count is 1, we can do qs.first. If it does not exist or it doesn't equal to this parameter, then we'll just create a brand new one and start that new session. So this kind of handles the use cases all around, right? That's really good for us in case of how this is actually going to be created. So the biggest question here is there redundant information here? And the answer is yes. So the ID equaling to none will not exist, right? It won't actually be there, so we'll actually create it. So really, I can tab this back and comment this out, and it's doing roughly the same thing, It's just we kind of skipped over the logic and reasoning of it. Instead, we were just going to look up right away, hey, does this cart exist? Is this a real cart ID? If not, then go through with everything else. That's pretty much it, right? So this doesn't actually do a lot to the database, so it's a really quick lookup itself, and then at the very end, we actually create the cart going forward. Okay, so now that I've got that, I'm going to go ahead and I'll leave that commented out. And I will say that the way we actually created this cart is probably not the best. We probably want to do it a little bit better somewhere else. So if you have any questions on what we did here, let us know. Otherwise, let's keep going.